Hello everyone and welcome back to Did You Know Gaming Extra. Today we'll be taking a look at a console that shaped the childhoods of many young gamers everywhere, the Nintendo DS. If the DS succeeds, we will rise to heaven, but if it fails, we will sink to hell. These were the fabled words of then Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi on the eve of the handheld's launch. With more than 154 million units sold worldwide, it's hard to argue the DS was anything less than a roaring success. The landscape of the gaming industry looked very different back in 2003. Post-millennium game development costs were swiftly rising with a focus on improved graphics and in-game physics, and Microsoft's answer to the PlayStation 2 kicked off a rat race that's still being played out today. The GameCube began to fall behind the sales of these two consoles, and to add insult to injury, rumblings concerning the PlayStation Portable heralded Sony's advancement into the handheld space. This was a corner of the market Nintendo had thrived in comfortably for many years thanks to the much-loved Game Boy line of handhelds. As quickly as Nintendo had established itself as a home console giant, its position was destabilized and there were rumors the company would be pushed out altogether. A shakeup was clearly in order, and in a bid to survive, Nintendo looked to what they could do differently. Nintendo's pursuit of marketing touchscreen technology was less of a eureka moment than it first seems. Touch controls had been attempted by other Japanese gaming companies, with concepts passed around the industry since the Sega graphics board in 1985. Sega was particularly keen on developing a handheld with touch tech, but their designs never captured the public interest enough for them to break into the West. Plans to incorporate touch controls into a Game Gear successor also fell through due to how expensive it would be to manufacture. They revisited it once again for the Sega Pico in 1993, an edutainment console designed for kids. While this didn't create much of a wave in Western markets either, Nintendo and the Pokémon Company took interest in Sega's console enough to license Pokémon for a number of games on the system. Check out our region lock video on those if you'd like to learn more. In earlier years, such a partnership between Nintendo and Sega would have been unheard of, but by 2002, Sega no longer posed any serious competition. It's impossible to overlook how uncannily the Pico resembles some kind of Fisher-Price proto-DS knockoff, with its clamshell design complete with horizontal touchpad and stylus. Of course, it wasn't fully realized as such. The second screen was the TV the console had to be hooked up to in order to run, and the vertical half was dedicated to the Pico's storyware cartridges. However, aside from this quirky gimmick, the basis of the DS's design can be seen in this relatively obscure Sega product, and demonstrates that Nintendo's innovation did not develop in a bubble. From preschoolers to grandparents, growing up in the mid-2000s saw people of all ages carting a DS around with them. The pursuit of an unconventional gaming audience also allowed for non-traditional problem solving, by catering to a different kind of player who wasn't accustomed to the usual methods of shooting, hitting, and otherwise maiming things littered throughout a game. One non-traditional title on the system was Go Go Coco Polo, a chronically overlooked DSiWare game that released late in the handheld's lifecycle. Coco Polo includes a secret, peaceful ending that goes against the very spirit of its own gameplay. The game begins after the titular wildcat, Coco Polo, is rudely awakened from his afternoon nap and vows to get revenge. The core gameplay consists of hunting down peaceful forest critters, attacking them so they become hostile, and then luring them to their own death via carnivorous plants. It's a game of cat and mouse turned on its head, with a very silly supervillain origin story to boot. Except, it doesn't have to be. The player can refuse to attack the first NPC they encounter in the game, which will thank Coco Polo for sparing it. Then, the culprit for Coco Polo's rude awakening will appear, apologize for their earlier slight, and ask if they could be friends. The two shake on it, and a scrolling message appears on screen commending the player. By choosing not to react, you have broken the endless cycle of conflict and violence. Now peace will forever spread across this world. You are a super peaceful player. Nintendo also focused on bolstering accessibility with the DS. They did this via their in-house game brand, Touch Generations, which shipped out several games designed for and marketed towards traditional non-gamers throughout the DS's lifecycle. Set at a cheaper price point, these included Brain Training, Art Academy, and Nintendogs, all staples of any DS owner's library. Third-party developers acknowledged the unlikely success of these instant classics and shifted gears to follow suit. One such title was developed by Sega Japan, the shameless brain training knockoff Mind Quiz Your Brain Coach. Designed by the first lady of RPGs herself, Rieko Kodama, the game landed in hot water after it released in the UK, as performing poorly in the game resulted in the player being labelled as a derogatory ableist term in the region. A Belfast woman encountered the unfortunate phrasing after playing the game in hospital while giving birth, and voiced her complaint to radio host Stephen Nolan live on BBC Ulster. Her first son, who suffered from cerebral palsy and severe brain damage, had passed away just 6 months prior. She was understandably upset with the choice of words in the game, especially as it was rated appropriate for ages 3 and up. Unfortunately for Kodama and the company, many of Nolan's listeners were similarly outraged, and the story quickly went viral. Ubisoft, as the game's publisher outside of Japan, bore the brunt of the complaints and were driven to halt distribution and pull the game off shelves. In their official statement, they laid the blame primarily on cultural differences, but shouldered partial responsibility by admitting a failure in their own QA testing. It may seem like a cop-out at first, but MindQuiz continued to sell in Australia without controversy, as the word isn't seen as an offensive term despite the nation using British English. Don't be fooled into thinking the land down under is a place where games get a free pass. The DS title Dragon Ball Origin sent Atari into their own recall frenzy just 2 months after its Australian release in December 2008. Despite the game receiving a teen rating in America and 12+ in Europe, Origins received a PG rating in Australia. While not grossly explicit in nature, flashes of a nude Kid Goku occur multiple times throughout the game. And the opening chapter features a bizarre sequence in which Bulma flashes a leering Master Roshi for a Dragon Ball, who in classic anime fashion suffers a heavy nosebleed at the sight. In the following scene, Bulma returns home where she is shocked to discover the underwear she thought she was wearing had been taken off by Goku while she slept the night before. Granted, it's faithful to the game's source material, but it's difficult to understand how these mildly lewd moments could have been so overlooked by the Australian Classifications Board. Thankfully for Atari, the blame could only be laid squarely at the feet of the Classifications Board for the oversight. Moving on to something a little more light-hearted, let's talk about the wealth of Easter eggs, thinly veiled references, and hidden messages in DS games. The interactive mystery novel Last Window: Secret of Cape West includes one such in-joke. If the player chooses to inspect the protagonist Kyle Hyde's wardrobe, he'll declare, "I like suits, they're comfy and easy to wear." This might seem like an arbitrary line of dialogue, unless you've played the first generation of Pokemon games where a trainer declares, "I like shorts, they're comfy and easy to wear," seconds before challenging the player to a battle. This bizarre line was catapulted to internet stardom and a place in the Meme Hall of Fame, and has even been referenced in later Pokemon titles. The much-beloved sandbox puzzler Scribblenauts has references galore. Originally developed by 5th Cell exclusively for the DS, the Japanese localization has a fleet of exclusive cameos from publisher Konami's extensive roster. This includes Castlevania's Alucard, Goemon and Ibizumaru from The Legend of the Mystical Ninja, as well as various iterations of Metal Gear's Snake. Dating sim love interest Monica also got a look in as a nod to Love Plus, a highly popular DS title sold exclusively in Japan. The player can even fly in the Vic Viper from the classic arcade shoot-'em-up Gradius. All can be spawned into the game world by entering their names like any other object in the game. No secret cheat codes found by scouring copies of Nintendo Power here. Scribblenauts also managed to take first place for the most meta moments mentioned in this video, giving the player the ability to spawn its own DS cartridge into the game world by entering a number of phrases, including, but not limited to, Maxwell spelled backwards, Game of the Year, Game of the Century, Game of the Forever, Innovation, or Innovative. As you might expect, some DS games have interesting secrets hidden within their data. Delving into the inner workings of a game's code can offer insight into design decisions, as well as access to content otherwise destined for the cutting room floor. Go-Go Cosmo Cops had an entire additional language option tucked away inside its code. While the game was released exclusively in Europe, plans were in place to release a Japanese version of the game under the alternative title Shutsugeki Acronites. An exclusive European release on a Nintendo console was unusual in itself. Add this to a colourful cast of chibi characters with Japanese developer Noise at the helm, and it's difficult to imagine the title wouldn't do well in the region. Regardless, plans fell through and the Japanese version was cancelled before official release. However, the language option can be accessed via a ROM patch, allowing for Japanese players to experience the game in their native language. With all the uncertainty that went into the handheld with the DS's launch, Nintendo knew they needed a killer app to really get their console flying off the shelves, so they brought out the big guns, Super Mario 64, DS. Originally released in 1996 on the exact same day as the Nintendo 64, it's no exaggeration to say that Super Mario 64 is one of the most influential games ever made, and established key elements that define modern platformers. The DS's ability to render 3D graphics allowed Nintendo to remake Super Mario 64 from the ground up. Ideas for improvement and iteration were clearly thrown around, as evidenced by a fully functional red variant of the Koopa Trooper that can be found by making minor changes to the game's code. Unlike the green Koopa Troopers, who flee from the player if they get too close, this unused enemy behaves similarly to a bully, the ultra-aggressive cannonball on legs that charges straight at the player on sight. However, while they succeed in knocking Mario over, these red variants don't dish out any damage, possibly because the idea to include them had been scrapped before any damage values could be attached to their behavior. When knocked out of their shells, they aren't sent into a panic like the green variant. Instead, they remain unfazed and will continue to charge at Mario until they get close enough to hop back into their shell. Furthermore, Mario cannot surf on the empty red shells. The game will acknowledge it as a physical object, but when attempting to jump on it, Mario will simply slide off. Incidentally, when either the red Koopa or its shell is eaten by Yoshi, he will spew out a fireball, as he does in Super Mario World. The game's code also includes several unused areas. While the majority were clearly dedicated for level testing and the like, the remains of the original room containing the warp pipe to the princess's secret slide is still within the game. This hexagonal room was small and unassuming in the N64 version, with a sign lamenting the loss of the castle's power stars at the hands of Bowser. In the DS remake, this was extended into a hub of sorts, with the ability to swap characters and access minigames. The original room is integrated into the new castle's model, though with poor textures and no collision data. Still, this hasn't stopped nostalgic fans from attempting a restoration of the room, cleaning up the textures and creating new collision maps to bring it up to par with the rest of the game. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today, we'll be talking about Japanese slot machines.
Hit the lever!
In December 2019, that's very recent for us, hello viewers in 2020, a newly trademarked logo for a Japanese Wheel of Fortune slot machine surfaced. Looking at the logo, any RPG fan should immediately notice that the logo is, whoops. Okay. Looking at the logo, any RPG fan should immediately notice that the logo is inspired by the logo for the Super Nintendo classic Chrono Trigger. Plagiarism or homage? You decide.
Nice of Chair Barnon to invite us over for a picnic, eh, Venus Varnus?
I hope she made lots of cherry pie.
Look, it's from Corey Nelson. The three master gamers, Can1111 and I have caused an error 1355 to the Clefairy Kingdom. Your boy Beowulf is now a permanent guest at one of my 7 Patreon hotels. I dare you to find her if you can. We gotta find your awesome jacket, dude.
I can't be bothered.
If the whole kingdom is distracted, let's rob Everett Lathrop's house and have the picnic anyway. Guillermo Chavez always leaves the attic window open.
We should see if Jetestado 7 wants in on this.
Hello, Malcavio's collection of toasters. Call Trevor Wooten, we'll bake us some bread and get this picnic started. Damn it, Maximilian Summers switched the gravity off in here.
Oh, now there are Doja Beer and Red Apples. Oh, it's Mike Sinister.
Get out of my tree, Gary CXJK, I'm the Natch! Ah!
That's all for today. It's the end of the year, boys. My throat's sore. It's been a long year. Had a good one though. Had some laughs. We've had some cries. What's your New Year's resolution? My one is, God, don't you fucking hate the people who are like, well, my resolution is to not have one. Okay, pal. Good for you. And also, that's an oxymoron. And you're just a moron. leave your comments in the description down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next year of hearty video game content.